Jesus calms the storm. Mark 4:35-41. On the evening of that same day, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go to the other side of the lake." So they left the crowd. The disciples got into the boat, which Jesus was already sitting in, and they took him with them. Other boats were there too. Suddenly, a strong wind blew up, and the waves began to spill over into the boat so that it was about to fill with water. Jesus was in the back of the boat, sleeping with his head on a pillow. The disciples hurriedly woke him and said, "Teacher, don't you care that we're about to die?" Jesus stood up and commanded the wind, "Be quiet." And he said to the waves, "Be still." The wind died down, and there was a great calm. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "Why are you frightened? Do you still have no faith?" But they were terribly afraid and began to say to one another, "Who is this man? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Now, imagine you were one of the disciples in this story. Your teacher had been working all day, and people were amazed by this man. And by the end of the day, he looked pretty much ready to fall over at this point. He is absolutely exhausted. So instead, what you decide to do is go out onto the boat so that he can rest without people coming up and talking to him. But then a storm comes. How do you feel during storms? Would you feel differently if you were on a rickety little boat? Is there fear? Is there anger? Jesus is still sleeping at this point. How do you feel about that? Once they wake Jesus, he responds so nonchalant. He says, "Don't worry." How would you feel if you watched your teacher utter a few words and suddenly the weather bended to his whim? Could you believe it? How would you respond? What would you think? If Jesus had been telling you and teaching you about his ministry, would this be an affirming moment for you? Would you treat him differently after? Would you be afraid? See, it helps us to really put ourselves into these stories because we learn more from a different perspective. See, when we read the Bible as outsiders looking in, we may not always understand the fear or the decisions that people will make. But it's really important to be able to understand the circumstances in which every situation in the Bible is happening, because we are able to read it more concretely. We're able to understand what's happening in this story, what's going on. Why did Jesus decide to do what he did? Was it to make them believe? Or was it to teach them something? Now that you've done this with this story, did it answer some questions for you? Maybe it brought up more. Maybe you're still processing it. Any of these reactions are completely okay, and this is how many of us study the Bible. It is a long process. Sometimes it's shorter than other passages and sometimes confusing, but as long as you are trying, you're learning. That's what Bible study is all about. Learning the Word of God to the best of your ability and trying to interpret in new ways and learn in new ways and learn the compassion and the love of God. And it is pretty awesome. Thanks for joining me for this week's Theological Thursday. I hope to see you next week. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.